Hello everybody. So we have now another Grasshopper tutorial, and this time I want to start with a list exercise that I feel list and understanding what a list is in Grasshopper is really important. You're going to hear it all the time, and it's going to become really handy to have a good idea what lists are and how they work. So you can find in the workshop files one of the exercises that is called Understanding List Unsolved, and what you find in there is going to be these few components. So the exercise that I want you to try is create a few lines that actually the exercise files already have a few lines inside these components. But still, I want you to try something here. You can right click and clear values if there's something inside there, and try it on from 0. So just create a few points and a few lines. Make it this time a list to start with. Make it 4 points, 4 lines. And the idea is in Grasshopper, using this rotate component and this merge and entwine component, make these lines rotate 90 degrees, 100, and then to 70. So you go in a full circle, and just using these components. Okay. So the first part that I want to show is how or what happens when you try to bring geometry from Rhino, from the Rhino viewport, because you are still creating a list every time that you bring things from Rhino. And let's see, just clearing all up. When I come here, set one multiple curve, I'm gonna select this curve, this curve, this curve, and this one. Enter, or right click to finish. Now all of those curves are in here. And if you connect that to a panel just to see what's inside, you see all of those lines are now in that component. But how do you know which line, which reference line like curve, which one? So something that you can do is use this list item component. If you haven't used it before, it just lets you select one of the items using the index. Just to keep in mind, is this one on the left. This one are always going to be in sequence 0 to whatever number of elements that you have. That is not going to change. That's the index of all the information that you're dealing with in all the lists. So when I connect this, that is the list data or base list, which I'm putting on with the curves that I have, you see that for the index 0, this is the line that I have selected. Now I'm going to create a line that goes from 0 to 3. And if I connect that to the index, now I can look at the index 1. That's going to be this line here, index 2, this one on top, and index 3. Finally, this one at the bottom. And as you can see, if you pay close attention, it's going in the same way that I select them while I was clicking when I press set multiple curve. Now, Grasshopper is gonna take the list order in the way that you click things in the Rhino viewport. So I'm just clicking again to give the information to that curve component, and now I'm gonna just make it in the sequence. So now this is going to be 0, 1, 2, and 3. And we can see now, selecting this, 0, 1, this 1, 2, and 3. So as you can see, you just be very careful when you click things, when you bring things from Rhino into Grasshopper, where do you click? So you can be clear in how you're going to manipulate the data after that. I will keep repeating myself with this. In Grasshopper, you're using data, you're manipulating data, and you're connecting that information. It's all about the relationship between the geometry, the information that you create, which is containing geometry. Okay. Now, what I want you to do to experimentally be more about list and something more confusing in Grasshopper, that is trees and branches. And so for that, let's actually clear all these values. So now this one is empty, and follow this along. So select multiple curve, select this one, click. Now the second curve component, we're gonna populate it with this one and this one. Again, be mindful of how you click. Now for the points, I'm gonna do the same. Select multiple points. I'm gonna select this one. Remember, be really mindful or on the order that you click things in the Rhino viewport. Okay, now I have everything in Grasshopper. Something that I like to do when I'm dealing with geometries that is quite simple is simply to come here, right click, and internalize data, and do the same for all of the components. Internalize data. But this is a fairly simple geometry and it's really easy to forget to save the Rhino file, so I make sure that everything is in Grasshopper. So that way I can delete things from Rhino. And as you can see, now there's nothing in Rhino, but the geometry is still in Grasshopper. Okay. Now, how to rotate those lines when they're in different components? Because now if you try to just put all of the geometry in that rotate component, you can press Shift and you can put multiple things in one component. This is asking for first the geometry, which is going to be the lines, and then a plane, a rotation plane, or a center of rotation. And that's going to be the points. And then just an angle. Let's see if we place a slider. Okay. Seems it's working. So now to do multiple, you can make a list on your own. 0, let's make it 90, 180, 270. Let's finish that up, data, and plug that in. But now look what happens when you try to do that. And why is this? This is when it gets quite confusing. So you need to start looking at how this information is connecting with each other. So this is what happens. This is exactly what we have here. Both of the curves are going to one point. And this is what is inside this geometry. So again, it's just a list of elements with their pertinent index. And if you want to double check, sometimes actually I just double check multiple times because I'm not sure what could happen. I'm actually going to do this that is called a relay. You can do it by double clicking any line. You can make it appear, disappear. What you can do with that is you simply connect multiple things again with Shift, and that way it's easier to move multiple lines into one, and makes it easy sometimes. Okay. Now just to double check, now I can see, let's just disconnect this one. There you go. Those two line components that I know, these one are the ones on the top. These ones are the one at the bottom. I want them to go here so I can see what information is going into the geometry. And now if I click this list item, I can actually see how the geometry is moving along those lines, those connectors. So 0 to 3. Let's go to index. We have that. 0 is now that one at the bottom. 1 is that one. 2 and 3. But why is that if we have this as the 0, 1, 2, and 3? Okay. This is when it gets confusing. not only when you move things from Rhino to Grasshopper, you have to be mindful of where you click to make the order of the list. It's also how you connect things in Grasshopper. So because I connected this one first, so I just see if I disconnect and disconnect, depending on which component you connect first, it will make the order of the list. So now we go back to 0, 0, 1, and if I connect now this with shift, it's going to be in the correct order, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So you have to be really mindful of how you connect things in Grasshopper as well. Now, let's just disconnect this one again, just to make sure, and connect it in the right order. That's one thing. But still, if I want to rotate, it seems that it's rotating 90 degrees here. This is in the same point. This is moving all the way to 180, and this is going to 270. Why is that? Well, now we have to start looking at how these angles are matching the data. And what it happens with Grasshopper is that it's going to try to follow a logic to give the data from one input to another input. So once again, something that I want to do is to connect this in the correct order. So that one, that's one thing. Always making sure that you are connecting things correctly. And now let's see, I'm giving it this information to the angles. And the logic that it follows in Grasshopper is that first it's going to look for this gray area that is the tree branch. That's how you can identify those those branches. When you hear trees and branches in Grasshopper, it refers to this gray line. And I'm going to show you how you make more of those. But now, the next step for Grasshopper, the logic that it follows is branch. Okay, 0, 0 branch. Perfect. But then it's going to try to match 0 with 0, 1 with 1, 2 with 2, 3 with 3. And that's why it's going to rotate in this way, one by one, and not all of them in the same. So what you need to do is then create branches, and that's when these little guys come through. The first one that I want to show you is this one that is called merge. That is basically what I'm doing here with this relay. So, but you can do it in a little bit more organized way if you struggle to understand how things are connected. In here, if I use a relay, I have to be really mindful of what I connect first. As I showed you before, if I just connect things in the different order, if I connect, for example, this one first, so this one is going to start in 0, 1, and then this one is going to continue. With the merge component, you can be more graphical in how those are connected. So if I connect here, and then I connect to this number, and that's connected to this list item component, what it's going to do now is exactly the same as the relay. It's going to just connect those two just to make it go into one list, and it will keep the order that you give it in here, D1, D2, which is just these by for data stream, and it creates the list. So now you can see that if I just change this and this, I'm gonna now really easily that following the line, this is gonna be the next after, so I know that it's 2 and 3, it's that one, and this one is the start. Just something to do. You can come close to those ones and just create multiple, or just to keep it clean, reduce it. That a function that this component has is that every time you plug something in, it will create a new one, so you can keep connecting things, and then you can go back and delete one to keep it clean. So that's the merge component. But you have now the entwine component, and what the entwine component does is create branches. Instead of just adding things to the same list, will create a new branch for anything that you connect. So if we do the same, connect this curve and this curve, and I connect this to this panel, this is what it looks like. This is what a branch is. This is a tree. So now we have the branch 0, 0, that is going to be this curve. And it's again, more or less, it's always following along the indexes of the list. And then because I connected this curve into 0, 1, this one I know, these are those two. Something to keep in mind with this entwine component is that while in merge, it doesn't matter if you have this empty, with the merge with an entwine component, sorry, it will matter because this branch is going to remain empty. It will appear in the list empty, and we'll try to still match to that branch. So it is important that you keep it as clean as possible. Now, let's see what happens if I try to connect this instead of making it them lists. I make it 2 branches. Click. Oop. Here we go. And click. Okay, we're going somewhere, but it's still not quite right. And this is something that you're going to have to experiment with, just to find the way that the data is going to match. Actually, I'm going to copy this so you can see better what's going on. So this is what 2 entwine lists look like, 2 lists that are divided by branches. And let's just move this here. And I'm going to connect these to a different mesh. I'm going to merge these points. So this actually, I'm going to organize it again, so I know it's in the right order. And this is what 2 merge lists look like. So be always mindful of those little differences, because remember, Grasshopper is going to try to match the data that you have to create the geometry that each one of these components is trying to create. So with the merge, we saw that this 0 is going to try to go to this 0, 1 to 1, 2 to 2. What happens with the branch, though, is going to try to make the information to match first. 0 with 0, go 0 and 1, go to 0 and 1, and then the 0, 0, 1, go to the 0, 0, 1, and again, it will try to match. And like I say, it's going to be some practice, but this is what you need to understand really, really well, and give it a try a few times. When something is not really, you're trying to make something connect with the information and it's not quite right, just try to merge and create branches and create lists and see what works. I'm going to show you here what works in this case for you to have a better idea. So what I want to do is, this is the curve, yes. I'm going to try to do this and it still doesn't work. Let's try the opposite. What happens if I keep the points, but I keep the branches in here? Not quite right. And this is actually something that sometimes I have to go myself, even if I have an idea of how things work, because it is confusing. And I'm going to show you use the solved. That, yeah, I was trying to remember what I was missing. And this one more step that I forgot. That is graph. So for the graph, which is this little tree, this little kind of plant growing. let's come back here. That is going to be graphed tree. And what it does when you graph things is that completely divides everything. So I'm actually gonna create more of these panels for you to see the information. Let's connect this, move this graph here, move it back. Let's create a panel here. This is what happened with a graphed. Again, graph tree, what it's going to do is that it will take all the information that you have in the list and make every element into a branch. Let's do the same here, connect it in there. And now all the lines and curve are going to be in different branches. And sometimes you might need to do that. And just keep trying. What happens then if I connect all of those? Oop. Here. Interesting. Why is it not working? How about if I disconnect this? From text to geometry. Oh, because I connected this directly. Something to be careful. When you connect things to a panel, it becomes text. And here the rotate component is asking for a geometry. So just be also mindful of that. And just move it here, making it clean. I'm going to connect this one. And points here. And I want you to try a little bit. Keep doing this process before you go to the answer that I'm going to show you next. Keep trying those. Keep trying to find the logic of where these rotation angles need to go in here. So after you experiment a little bit, just return to this tutorial and look at the answer. Or you can just look at the answer and then try it again. It comes to you. But the logic that you would need to follow then is, if you want each of these angles to go to each of these lines, then you need to make it go that this branch is going to one of these branches, and that branch is going to take all of this information. So what I actually need to do is going to take all these lines, which I have here, make this too big, and match each one of these lines with each one of these points, and then let all of these angles go to each one of this information. So this one is already going to the geometry that I want to rotate. This one that is the points, it's going to go to the points, and now we got the answer. All of these are going correctly into each one, and it's going in full circle. So just to go back into what I tried to say here, follow the logic, try to see where the information is going, and then try to experiment with the lists and branches. So to summarize here, I want this branch that is 0 to be given to each one of these lines. So each one of these lines rotate by each one of these index elements. So now that this gray one, the branch 0, 0 is in this little group, this group is going to go to whatever branch is in this list. So now this 0, 0, 0 branch is going to this 0, 0, 0, and is given this line like 0, 90, 180, and 270, and it's going to be the same for each one of this. So this branch, go this one to this branch, and actually let me try this might be easier to visualize. Let's see if I do this really quickly. So this one is going to this one, and this branch is going now to this branch, and so on. It's going to just continue matching the branches and then giving the information. Oop. And it's going to be the same for the line and the point, because you have to match again, because the geometry component is asking you for the geometry and the point of rotation. It's actually asking for the plane of rotation, which is in the center of the rotation. You need to give that point, tell the Grasshopper that this line is rotating following this point, and that's why I also divided it into branches. So now Grasshopper knows that this branch and point is going to this branch and point and line, and this one is going to this one. And that's why it's so important from the beginning, try to keep a close eye on how the list is created, which element is 0, which one is 1, 2, 3, which index all of those elements have, because you will need to match those index again with the rest of the information, the rest of the data. And this is simply just going in the same, following the same logic. And that's how Grasshopper is going to do all of the relationships of information, of data into Grasshopper. That's the logic that you always have to follow and try to experiment with. Sometimes if the geometry is quite simple, keeping it in the list even will work quite fine. But when you start to get more complex information, especially when you start going into 3D geometries, the complexity is going to be quite challenging to remain everything matching correctly, and that's when the branches come really handy. And I would say just experiment with those. Try this exercise a few times, try to see without looking at the answer. Try to replicate yourself this same exercise, going from 0, doing the lines from 0, from scratching right now. Give it a try and see how it goes, and keep experimenting with it. Okay, I would say that's gonna be it for this understand the list video. I'm actually gonna show before I leave a case study that inspired this little exercise. That is a project that I'm working with. And into perspective, what I had is a few lines making up a building, kind of like a DNA figure. There's a few lines more going in there, but the interesting part is that I needed to divide this end of the element, which is bamboo, into a few lines to then split this and make a few cuts. And to make that, well, I had to take this circle, then find that plane, so the plane is aligned with the circle, create a line that is going in that direction, and to make it easier, I just multiply that line into the same, what we did, into 90, 180, and 270. But then, because I actually had all of that in one component, if I try to split things, and this might be a little bit complex, but it was the same case of having to divide the information so I could reach this point where I once again had all those lines nicely organized so I can match the data easier than trying to find a different way between all the lists that I had before. So if you can see in here, this list is exactly the same, it's just that it's in different places, different lists, and it's just hard to manipulate. So I had to divide it until I got to that point that I could just easily match all the information. This is one of those applications that you don't know that you're going to encounter until you do, And that's why it's good to have a good understanding of the base logic of how Grasshopper works. So it doesn't matter what exercise you do, it doesn't matter what project you do, you know that the logic is going to apply for everything. So practice those lists, practice understanding how the information is moving between each one of these components. Last one thing that I want to say that I just remember is Grasshopper actually have the graphical reference to know if a component has a list or has branches on it. So if you have one of these lines that is double line, is because it's one list with multiple elements, which is like this list, that is one branch, one list with 3 elements. But when it's a tree, is going to have this dashed line, which means that the list has multiple branches. And finally, if you have one list that it has just one element, the line is going to change again to be a solid line. Just as references, you can see the 3 different ones. Oop. Something that it might come handy sometimes to realize more about what you're dealing with. All right, that's gonna be for this video tutorial. I hope you enjoyed and you learned a lot and you have a good understanding of lists and you can experiment with it. And I'll see you in the next video.